Thank you, and thank you to this panel for not only being here, but also sharing your story and your video to put a human face on this latest recall we have. I'd like to express my condolences to you, Mr. Altmeyer, and you, Mr. Tusnow, and Mr. Hurley. We're glad that Jacob's doing better, and it's good to have your whole family here. Thank you for being here. As family members and victims of this outbreak, I'm sure that you have asked yourself the same questions I've asked myself. What was this company thinking releasing tainted product to the public? During our investigation, the committee requested and received internal emails from PCA relating to the outbreak and past testing for Salmonella. I'd like to ask you about some of these documents. Mr. Hurley, right in front of you there is the book, this document book. Let me ask you this. On October 6th, it's tab number 43, if you want to open it up there, tab number 43. On October 6, 2008, Stuart Parnell, president of the Peanut Corporation America, responded to news from Sam Lightsey, the manager of PCA's plant in Blakely, Georgia. As tab 43 says, Mr. Lightsey had informed Mr. Parnell, quote, "We've received final lab results from Diebold this morning, and we have a positive for Salmonella." Mr. Parnell's response was as follows. And again, it's found there in tab 43, and it's on the board. We need to discuss this. The time lapse, besides the cost, is costing us huge, and there's dollar signs, and causing obviously a huge lapse in time from the time we pick up peanuts until the time we can invoice. And in there you see there's $5 signs. Let me ask each of you, what's your reaction to this company responding to positive Salmonella testing with concern about its own financial well-being? Mr. Hurley, you want to start?
Not to sound trite or overly confident, but as a police officer, I can unequivocally say that it's criminal.
Okay. Mr. Tusnow?
An act that is this egregious, I completely agree with Mr. Hurley. I mean, this is a completely criminal act that, in essence, he was really playing Russian roulette with children and the elderly when he sent this peanut butter out.
Mr. Altmeyer, care to comment?
When I came here today, I didn't think I could possibly get more outraged than I already am about how this happened. But I have to tell you, it's reached another level after seeing emails and comments from Mr. Parnell. No excuses.
Well, tab 46, there's another tab and there's another email. And let me just, there are other facts and emails the committee has uncovered, but you indicated a criminal, that it was criminal, Mr. Hurley, being a former police officer myself, and identifying with you. Justice Department is doing their investigation. There were certain things that our committee could and could not go to or bring out at this time. So I want to assure all of you that there still is a criminal investigation going on. You also mentioned about your dog and sitter there taking care of it. What are we, China? Well, 2006, some of those peanuts that were positive came from China. So it is a global problem.
It is.
But let me ask you this. Number 46, tab 46, one more if there. Even after several weeks into this outbreak, Mr. Parnell was asking the FDA whether it could use peanuts from its plants. Here's what they wrote to the FDA. And again, obviously we're not shipping any peanut butter products affected by the recall, but desperately at least need to turn the raw peanuts on our floor into money. So we have at least two emails here in which Mr. Parnell reacts to the outbreak by worrying about how much money it's costing him. Any comments on that? Mr. Hurley?
Narcissistic, I would say, maybe.
Okay. Mr. Tusnow?
I'm at a loss, personally. I mean, I just can't see how anyone could run a business and be a member of a community and maybe even belong to a church in that community and be making decisions not only like this, but also putting jobs in that community at risk as well in a very, very tight environment like this too.
Mr. Altmeyer?
I would expect that if you're making food, you would want to eat that food that you're producing. And I don't believe that Mr. Parnell would actually want to eat this product if he's producing food in that manner.
Well, thank you, and again, let me thank you for coming here and sharing your stories. I know it's difficult, but we need to have the human face, because people have to see, they just think we just have these hearings, but there's a reason for these hearings, that's so people see what happens when, frankly, a number of people let us down, but including our own government. So that concludes my 5 minutes for questioning. Mr. Walden for questions. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we've said here, I've been updated that now in Oregon we have 12 lab-confirmed reports of Salmonella. And also, as I referenced in my comments, they now have confirmed the dog and the dog biscuits from the household were positive as well. So, Mr. Hurley, I believe it was you who said somebody's watching your dog. We now know that it's there as well. I wonder if Mr. Parnell is in the audience. Mr. Parnell in the audience? You know, I would think that the least he could have done was be here to hear your comments and to hear about your loved ones, like a victim impact panel, because that's really what this is today. Mr. Ulmer, I'll be asking Mr. Parnell, as I mentioned in my opening statements, and I appreciated the comment about Russian roulette, because that's really what this is about, is which of these would he eat and his company, because they sure put it out there for your mother and your father and Mr. Hurley, your son, and all the rest of us to consume. And I wonder if he'll take the top off. We're going to give him that opportunity. Mr. Hurley, from your written testimony, it seems like you were pleased with the state of Oregon's response to your son's illness. Can you tell me what Oregon did that was helpful to you and that may serve as a model for other states? What out of that experience can you share with us?
At the time when Dr. Keene came to our house, I was unfamiliar with his rank and status, and
as the state epidemiologist.
As the state epidemiologist, exactly. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've learned, as my friend said, it is kind of, in terms of rank, like having the director of the FBI come by to just take latent fingerprints. What he did, though, is unique for the whole country, and that is that Jake is the only person in the whole country where you have a DNA link between the product, the Austin peanut butter crackers, and his lab samples. Sorry for the crassness, but his lab fecal samples.
Sure.
And that it is an exact DNA match. So they know that the peanut butter crackers that he ate that went through his system is what made him sick. And Jake's the only one in the whole country, and that's because Dr. Keene came to our house at 5 p.m. on a Saturday night on his own time while running errands because he was concerned enough about where this was going and what was happening that he then took those samples, sent them off to the lab, and he said that the lab spent lots of time and lots of hours and money on it to find that link. And with that kind of a link, then they had a batch number and a processing number that they were able to contact Keebler with directly.
And as far as you know, that wasn't done anywhere else in the country?
To this date, when I spoke to him last on Friday, I believe it was, and at that time nobody else had any direct links. And as he said, most states don't have the manpower or money to do that. And also, it seems as if most state epidemiologists, they know that people have gotten sick because they get that from the county health records, and then they work for, on the other side, looking at the lab results of product out there or voluntary lab results, but they don't put the two and two together by looking for product at its location.
I would say, too, as my staff was collecting this assortment of products that are on the recall list, we ran into, even in some of their homes, items that are on that list that, frankly, they thought had already been thrown out, destroyed, whatever. And sort of beyond this hearing, but in real time, people may still have products at home that should be destroyed. And as we were chatting here, just the breadth, the scope of the items that are out there. What would you, I mean, you suffered, well, Jacob suffered through this certainly as a parent, and I, like you, am a parent. What should we be telling people across the country today about this?
I don't know what we should be telling them, but I do know that one of the tough things has been getting all the products off the shelves. I know that locally in Oregon there was a story done where they went to some small local markets where people weren't getting their product directly from a supplier. They were going out and purchasing themselves, a small mini mart kind of situation, with lots and lots and lots of products on the shelf. And how do you get that word out when it's voluntary? There's no system in place to get the word out to all these retailers of all these different products.
Did you do searches online looking for products once you started down this process? I mean,
no,
what else did you have?
we gave up our supply of peanut butter crackers to the doctor, and after that, as he said, just don't eat anything with peanuts in it or any peanut products until we know more down the road. And so, we've got stuff still in our pantry, but it's sitting there waiting to kind of see how this develops, because I know it'll be a little bit longer.
Yeah, I guess that's the concern, is everything in the pantry. And it's amazing to me how much what we consume has some peanut or peanut paste or something in it that may well be on this list. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hurley.
Thank you. Just want to let you know, as of last night, Republican cloakroom still had Keebler peanut butter crackers in there. Mr. Shimkus brought it to our attention, and I think we got it out of your cloakroom.
Yeah, they're supplied by the Democrats in a continuing conspiracy.
Just trying to help. Ms. Christensen, for questions, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you and your families for being here this morning and for sharing these painful stories with us. Do you have any concerns about the speed with which the outbreak was linked to peanut butter by public health officials? We've focused a lot on the company itself, but I want to just turn the focus to our response as a government.
I'd like to add that my mom ate the peanut butter sometime in mid-December, and the Salmonella outbreak was known about in early September. So the time it took to find out the cause could have prevented a lot more of the problems that happened.
I just have another question that either of you could answer, or all of you. I'll preface it by saying that as a physician, I used to do drug testing on ships coming into port and so forth for the people that work there, and I had to ascertain by temperature that this person gave me the sample, and I had to be responsible for the chain as it went from the ship to the lab. So I have a lot of concerns about the second lab test, whether the second samples were from the same batch, and especially with positive tests going back to 2007. Do you think it's good enough for the company themselves to be the ones collecting, contracting for the testing, and reporting the results? Shouldn't that be fixed?
Well, I think clearly in this case that is definitely the key. I mean, clearly the company could not be trusted to do it on their own. Now, I know that there are probably a lot of companies that are running an ethical business, but unfortunately we have to worry about the ones that are not. And we have to have a process in place that allows us to be in charge of that.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for this panel, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Mr. Deal, for questions, please, 5 minutes.
Well, I too express my sympathy to all of you for the loss of your family members and certainly the trouble that your young son has undergone. We've heard Mr. Hurley talk about his interaction with his state epidemiologist. Would the other two of you elaborate on any contact you may have had with health authorities? For example, did any of you get contacted by the CDC, et cetera?
My brother, actually, Marshall, was contacted by the state of Minnesota. And we found out, it was about, I want to say about a week after the fact, after my father died, or maybe a few days after he died, that indeed he did have salmonella, and they actually found it in his blood.
It was about 2 weeks after my mother died that my sister Ginger received a call from the Minnesota Department of Health asking if we had brought in any kind of food from the outside. Had she eaten chicken? Had she eaten peanut butter? And it was my sister who remembered she had served my mother peanut butter toast a few times. That really became a huge key to finding out. Actually, I've heard the Minnesota Department of Health was very instrumental in finding the very source of this outbreak, and we were told by them that my mother's death was key to the whole thing.
Okay. Well, I think the reason for this oversight and investigation hearing is to find out how we can best plug the loopholes and close the gaps so that hopefully we will not see a repeat of this kind of situation in the future. And we thank you all for taking the time and going to the expense of being here today. And with our assurances that I'm sure our chairman and other members of this committee will follow through to try to make sure we can do the best we can from our end to make sure it doesn't repeat itself. Thank you all for being here. I yield back.
Ms. Sutton, for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all so much for your testimony, for coming here to dispel any notion that, that your loved ones are acceptable collateral damage or some sort of statistic, as opposed to real people with real families who are suffering because of actions that have been taking place. If I may, I'd like to show you some new information that the subcommittee received and get your response to it. I have a statement from Michelle Pronto, and I believe it's at tab 10 there. Ms. Pronto works for J. Leak Associates, which is one of the private labs PCA used to test Salmonella. She manages the microbiology lab there. The subcommittee spoke with Ms. Pronto, and she agreed to provide a written statement, which I asked to be placed into the record.
Without objection.
Ms. Pronto explains in her statement that in October of last year, her lab found Salmonella in PCA's peanut products. She reported this positive finding to Sam Lightsey, who is the plant manager, as we know, in Georgia, and this is how she described their conversation. She stated, quote, "When I called Mr. Lightsey in early October 2008 to give the serology reports that JLA had obtained from Dibel Lab for the confirmed Salmonella, he paused and said, uh-oh, we saw this a little earlier, or something to that effect, and then told me he had released the product for shipping. When I asked if he could get it back, he said it was on a truck heading to Utah," end quote. Now, you guys saw that earlier, and let me ask you, any of you, is there anything you'd like to say in response when you hear this statement from the plant manager and that he shipped the product without even waiting to get the results of the Salmonella test?
I'd like to add, I know that trucks can be stopped, doors can be opened, product can be taken out, or the truck can be just turned right around. It costs more money, sure, but it's easy to do.
Anybody else?
I would concur. That's absolutely ludicrous.
Okay. And let me share something else that Ms. Pronto had to say. She said, quote, "During a phone conversation in August 2008, Sammy Lightsey of PCA informed me that the Albany, Georgia JLA lab was reporting higher aerobic plate count, those are APC results, and higher coliform results than another lab he apparently used. Then she said this, quote, "I received an email on 9/10/08, September 10th of 08, from JLA employee Stephanie Fletcher stating that she was told by QC manager, quality control manager of PCA, that PCA was no longer going to send us samples. Finally, she said this, quote, "I called Mr. Lightsey to follow up on the recent discussion regarding the confirmed positive, and he confirmed that because of the high coliform results, they were going to send samples to a different lab," end quote. So this lab official certainly seems to be saying that when PCA didn't like the positive test results, it just took its business elsewhere. So what is your opinion? And I could guess, but I don't think anyone could say it better than you. What is your opinion of a business that engages in activity like this?
I think, unfortunately, that this is an example of why we can't trust self-checking or self-regulation. And I think this is the example of why our food supply is not safe.
You can't have lab shopping. You can't have lab shopping going on to find your best results.
It's just a complete conflict of interest. They're the ones who do not benefit by the negative results or positive results, whatever they may be. They can't shop around.
Again, I thank you very much for your testimony, and I am so very sorry for your loss.
Following up on the last question, if I may, with your 30 seconds, do you think any lab results from any food producer should automatically be sent not only to the producer of that food, but also to the FDA simultaneously? Goes to each place? Any objection to that? I need yes or no. You can't.
No objection, no, and I actually would have just been under the assumption that that's how the process already was.
Yeah, it's not the way it goes. It's part of our legislation. Thank you. Mr. Dingree, for questions, please, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I've already expressed my condolences to the family, and I will repeat that now. I know this is a painful experience for all the family members, as we can see in your faces as you give your testimony. I guess the main question that I want to ask you, because we will have the 2 subsequent panels. Hopefully the second panel will respond to our questions, but it's likely, as I said in my opening statement, that they will not. But of course the third panel is a very important panel. So I guess my question to each of you is, what would you want us to ask them? And when I say them, I'm talking about the FDA, I'm talking about the CDC, I'm talking about USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. I'm talking about the Department of Agriculture in the respective states, all 50 have one, and the health departments. And so if you could maybe tell me ahead of time what to ask, I'll be glad to do that when we have that opportunity. So any one of the 3 of you.
I'd like to respond and say, ask them why anyone would not want to have mandatory recalls. Why do we leave it up to the companies to decide when they're going to recall their product? That's an important part. I guess that would be my main question. Thank you.
I'm not sure that you were asking the question maybe down this line, but I think the question that I have is, why does the FDA not already have this authority? Why do they not have the ability to recall these items themselves? And secondly is a budgetary issue. Why are their inspectors and number of inspections continuing to decline? Who's in charge of the budget? Because if you think about people's main concern, it's safety of food. Foremost, we have to be able to eat. This is just as important as the economy is right now.
No comment.
Well, I thank you, gentlemen, and again, I think that we on the committee are very appreciative of you coming and testifying, as painful as it is. I don't know if you are aware, but on this committee, on both sides of the aisle, we probably have 3 MDs. We have a registered nurse. We have a clinical psychologist. And we have some experts that have been on the committee for a long time, the chairman and ranking member, in regard to these health care issues. So it's something that certainly has got our attention, and obviously we plan to do everything we can to try to close that weak link in the chain, because, as I said, it's only as strong as the weakest link, and obviously there's a problem. And we thank you so much for being here.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll be glad to yield to the ranking member.
I think it's important to point out that it's already against the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act law to knowingly ship product that tests positive. That's the amazing thing here. Everything we have, it would appear they knew it was positive. You get a positive hit on a Salmonella test, you're supposed to destroy the product. They may test again to figure out in their process where they're having this contamination. That's a different deal, but you're not supposed to ship it out for consumption. And that's what's outrageous here. So I just say that piece already in the law. Obviously, the inspection piece and some of these other things need to be dealt with, but it's just stunning. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I have any remaining time, I yield back.
Chair, let me use 45 seconds of your remaining time. Even subpoena power, I've been trying to get the FDA to have subpoena power for 12 years, and they keep denying us, saying they don't need it. A great example where you need subpoena power. Ms. DeGette?
Thank you. Well, okay, let's talk about subpoena power. Let's talk about the criminal laws. But these companies don't even have to produce their records to the FDA if they have these tests for Salmonella. And in the previous peanut contamination hearing we had with ConAgra, what happened was they had, it wasn't as blatantly criminal as this case, but what happened in that case was they had water dripping down and they had all kinds of records that showed this. And then they had the FDA inspectors come to the factory, but the company made this decision not to produce the records because the record showed that there was a problem. And so while it's true that it's a criminal activity, and while it's also true that the FDA could use subpoena authority, it would be pretty simple for Congress to pass a law, and in fact I think it's in Mr. Dingell's bill, to say that that it's also a requirement that they produce this information when they have a test that shows negative, that they produce it to the FDA and put some criminal penalties in place. And I'm sure all of you gentlemen would agree with that too. You know, I don't really have any questions. I just sit here and I feel sick at heart when I hear you talk about your families. And Mr. Hurley, when I see your little kids, you know, I have 2 girls myself, so I feel sick in hearing about your parents. And what makes me so sick, as I said in my opening statement, is I've been sitting here for 12 years listening to this. So I guess what I'll say is I want to echo what all of you said. It shouldn't be that hard for the most sophisticated country in the world to put a system in place that requires them to provide the documents when they see a problem, that requires or that gives the FDA mandatory recall authority, which, by the way, would act, I think, to light a fire under these companies if they knew that there was mandatory recall authority and they couldn't mess around. And then, as I mentioned in my opening statement, traceability, so that what happened in Oregon could happen in all the states, where if you had mechanisms in place that were interoperable, then you found Salmonella in a little kid in Oregon, you could rapidly work throughout the United States to figure out the source of that Salmonella and to recall all those food products. And if that happened, I don't think we would have lost Mr. Almer and Mr. Toussignant's parents because we knew about that Salmonella several months in advance. So I will make a commitment to you as someone who has worked on this for years, along with Mr. Stupak, Mr. Dingell, Mr. Waxman, our friends on the other side of the aisle. We're going to do this, and I hope we'll do it this year, because I don't want to be back here in 6 months. Neither do you, Mr. Walden or Mr. Gingrich, any of you guys. We've just sat here too long listening to this, and we can fix it. I've got some legislation. We've got comprehensive legislation. We need to figure out, shall we move this one bill at a time? We could do my mandatory recall bill on the suspension calendar next week. Mr. Walden would agree. I'll bet you Mr. Barton would agree. And we can do comprehensive food safety. We've been working on it for a long time. So I'll just make the commitment to you. We're going to do this, and we're going to do this in your loved ones' memories. Okay? And I'll yield back.
I can go ahead if you want.
I recognize Mr. Burgess for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And it does seem like deja vu all over again, to quote a great American. Mr. Walden is exactly correct, and we've dealt with a lot of these things repetitively, and all of the issues with notification, all of the issues with recall, all of the issues with the failure of the kill step to take the bacteria off the exterior of the peanut. Those are all very important, but if you've got a criminal mind at the back of it running the operation, it's just hard to know how you deal with that asymmetric threat. We know that through multiple hearings, as I referenced in my opening statement, we've beat on the FDA till it's a wonder there's anything left of them. They need better systems in place. We need to fund them better. We recognize that through hearing after hearing after hearing last Congress. We haven't even done our appropriations from last year yet. Those are due to come up in an omnibus bill in March, so they need more money, and we know that. We've been slow to respond. But still, at the baseline, if you've got that asymmetric threat of a criminal mind, all of these things are very, very difficult to prevent. They're preventable if you've got someone who's willfully ignoring the rules, and not just ignoring the rules, purposely working against you. Dr. Ingri's correct. You do have 3 physicians on this subcommittee. You've got a clinical psychologist and a nurse. After today's hearing, we may need the clinical psychologist as well as the nurse. I'm not sure if the doctors are going to do you any good. But let me just ask you, being a physician myself, and I'd like to ask each of you the same question generally. And Mr. Deal got to it a little bit, but this can be a difficult diagnosis, even though the clinical symptoms present themselves, and we're talking about Salmonella, and it seems very obvious to link the clinical symptoms with the ultimate diagnosis. But like Mr. Allman, in your situation, was the diagnosis, correct diagnosis, do the doctors have that in order to timely offer treatment, or was this something that was established after the fact?
We actually thought she had died from pneumonia, and we found out 2 weeks later that that wasn't even on the death certificate, and we were given notice by the Department of Health of the Salmonella positive test. That was our first notice of it.
And there is some time lag in normal clinical circumstances between submitting a sample and getting a test result back, whether it's positive or negative. So is that in fact what occurred during that time interval, or was this something in fact that was discovered completely after the fact?
From what I'm told, somebody was doing their due diligence at the facility, and they noticed they had some patients with diarrhea, and sent the stool samples for testing, and my mother's was one of those.
So there were actually more people in the facility who were affected?
There are actually, my sister lives up in the Brainerd community where 3 of the people have died. There actually are 2 others that may also die of Salmonella at this time.
Well, just for my curiosity, were any diagnoses made in time to offer treatment? Because Salmonella is treatable. Oftentimes the other underlying conditions can make it impossible, but the organism itself is one that we can generally get if we've got the knowledge.
There was some treatment, possible sepsis, blood infection, which is common, I guess, with Salmonella, but I don't think any of us knew, or the facilities knew, that my mother had Salmonella at that time, so she was already gone before anyone knew.
Okay, so to the best of your knowledge, no one received lab results in a timely fashion that would have allowed treatment to stop the disease?
No, to the best of my knowledge, no.
Yes, sir. And in your case with your dad?
I'm sorry?
I can't see, and I'm going to mess up your name anyway, but I can't see your nameplate.
Sure.
Mr. Tosignon?
Mr. Tuzino, yes.
Yes, sir. Okay, I'm sorry. In your situation, was a diagnosis established before your dad died?
To the best of my knowledge, no. I believe it was, like I mentioned earlier, a few days to a week later.
And again, very, very difficult for the caregivers involved because they're doing their best. And in your dad's situation, a bloodborne infection, which obviously would be a good deal more aggressive. And then, Mr. Hurley, in your situation, epidemiologist came to the house, but prior to that level of involvement, did your son's caregivers have an idea, your son's physicians have an idea of what, that his symptoms clinically might tip off the diagnosis of Salmonella?
Nothing was mentioned to us in the beginning, and actually the samples were given on a Wednesday. On Friday, the pediatric nurse called and said, well, so far things look good. And then it was the next day on Saturday or Sunday that the doctor called from home to let us know, because.
And then it was that result that led the epidemiologist to come to your home to collect the samples?
Correct. First it went to the county. A couple days later got a call from the county health, and then a couple days later got a call from the state epidemiology office, answered some questions over the phone, because then things were really starting to move along nationally in terms of PCA. And so then when he found out that even while he was sick, that he was eating the peanut butter crackers, he's like, can I come over in a couple hours?
Okay, but yeah, but of course your son was under active care from a pediatrician or a infectious disease specialist during the course of his illness?
No. I mean, they told us what the illness was. Basically, we just treated for, I mean, just made sure he had plenty of fluids. And,
so it was symptomatic treatment?
Right, symptomatic treatment, but no, he was not in a hospital.
Okay. Well, again, it just underscores it. It is a difficult diagnosis in a clinical setting, and then obviously made much more difficult by the criminal minds behind this enterprise. So again, just like every other member of the committee, our condolences on your loss, and thank you for spending so much time with us this morning. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Schakowsky for questions, please.
It's not so much a question unless you want to respond to it, but I do want to be sure and get on the record. And I'm wondering, is Mr. Parnell here yet? It's about to be on the next panel, I guess. There's on tab 4 a couple of emails that I just can't get over. On June 6th, 2008, a PCA employee sent an email to Stuart Parnell alerting him that their product may have Salmonella. If you look at that, you see it says lot number, put on hold, exclamation points. I just spoke with Stephanie with JKA, the private laboratory. This lot is presumptive Salmonella in caps, and a total of 15 exclamation points in these two sentences alone. Now, to any normal person, this would be a red flag, and the alarms would go off, and you'd realize this is serious. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. So here's the email that Mr. Parnell sent in response. Later in the day, he wrote, I go through this about once a week. I will hold my breath again. I will hold my breath again, unquote. So, I mean, how is anyone to react to the incredible disregard of this urgent email? It's just absolutely beyond me. I don't know if any of you can put this into words, and certainly we'd welcome your words on the record. Mr. Tucson, did you want to?
Yeah. When this first happened, I think for a couple of my brothers and sisters and I, we wanted to believe that this somehow was really just an accident, that something happened with one of the companies, that somehow this got into the food. And as we've gone along in this process of discovery and learning more information as each day goes on, it just baffles me, and I know it probably baffles every single one of us up here today, and in our families and the others in the country, that this is affected, that any one person can make a decision like this so consistently and so blatant.
I also want to say that I understand if you feel angry at us as well, because as Congresswoman DeGette said, we've been here before. And again, as others have, I just want to make a commitment that we are definitely going to create the systems, act quickly, so that hopefully we put in place the assurances that you're the last panel of people suffering from this that have to come before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeGette. Let me thank this panel again. I think that concludes everybody's questions. So with this, Mr. Hurley, your family asked when we were going to let you go. You're free to go. If you want to stay for the rest of this hearing, you can. Mr. Tisdall, Mr. Ulmer, if you'd like to, you can. But thank you for being here, and thank you for putting a face on it, on the tragedy that families are feeling across this country. So thank you very much for your testimony. The clerk wants to clear that table there, and then we'll start with our second panel of witnesses.